There is no light.
Why don't I just... So anyway, I thought I'd have one of those recliners, and then during the week I got to thinking, I can get in it, but it's going to take 2 or 3 guys from the audience to get me out of it. So anyway, I really appreciate your letting me come today and to speak with you. I'm kind of excited about it. Gee, this is loud. Maybe. It sounds good to you, huh? Okay. How many of you, this is your first church that you've ever belonged to or participated in? 1. See you later. We've all come from somewhere, haven't we? And we found unity. I want to share with you my journey in finding unity and what it has done for me. My story is probably no different than yours. We all have a story. And I'm sure that anything I have learned spiritually, you may exceed it, to match it or exceed it. But so I appreciate being able to do this because I kind of consider it a birthday gift. Thursday is my birthday, and I'm going to share it with my friend that I grew up with. She and I were only children, and I met her on the second day of kindergarten when she walked past my house. And that was 81 years ago. You do the math. I'm not admitting anything. Okay. I was baptized at the St. Paul's Methodist Church when I was 6 months old. And then I didn't go anymore. I lived with my parents who lived with my grandparents. And my grandmother was Catholic and my grandfather was Methodist. And neither wanted to go to each other's church. Nobody went. And my parents didn't go. And when I was 5, my daddy left me, or left us. And my mom took me to church. And I fell in love with it. I really enjoyed it. I went to Sunday school, and they gave us things to learn and to memorize. I had a certificate, and I could put a star on it when I memorized the Lord's Prayer or when I memorized the 23rd Psalm. And there were several things, and I was so excited to be able to do that. And when Mom didn't always take me, so by the time I was 7, I started walking the 8 blocks to church by myself. I know we wouldn't send our kids out alone to do that now, but that was a different day. And so I would walk to church, and I would be there every Sunday. And when I turned 12, at St. Paul's, we had a church of youth that was on an hour earlier than the regular service. And so, of course, I was there in that, and we had choir, which I joined right away, and we had speeches. Each of us give a little talk once in a while, and we had services of our own, and that was anybody from 12 through 18. And it was so exciting to be in the Church of Youth and to be able to be part of running it and deciding about it. And so I can really say that I had a wonderful childhood belonging to what I consider to be a religion. When I was 14, we would go after we had the services for youth. There was probably 15 to 18 of us, if not more. I can't remember exactly how many. And every Sunday we would go to a different church in town. And after that church, we'd talk to the rabbi, the minister, the priest, whomever, and they would tell us all about what their mission was and how they ran their church and what their purpose was. So I learned a lot about the different types of churches. And I think we've hit all of them. Some of them were a little boring. Some of them were exciting. We even danced and sang in one church, and I thought that was super. And I really liked that. But it was an education that I enjoyed very much. When I took vocal lessons from the time I was 10, and my music teacher belonged to to St. Paul's, and her daughter was the choir director over at Second Christian Church over on the west side. And she was the director of the chorus, and she wanted me to come and sing with them. Because I did a lot of singing, so I went over, and I was baptized again. They dipped me in the water. I thought I was going to drown, So I've been baptized twice. And again, we had a wonderful youth program there. And there's a lot of us that we would go camping together, we'd do retreats together, we'd study together. I even had a boyfriend. But it was exciting to do, and I just thought it was super. So I never had a problem with religion, if you will. But I didn't realize, until after I was married, my husband's nephew, they were all raised Catholic, 11 kids were raised Catholic, and he wanted to marry a Methodist girl. And so he asked me what Methodism stood for. What? I didn't know. I couldn't give him our mission statement. I couldn't give him what it was. And by this time, I was back at the Methodist church because my husband was Methodist. We were married in the Christian church, but we came back to the Methodist church. So I went to the library and found a book someplace and read up on it, and then had him read up on it. And I realized, I'm having a lot of fun at church, but I'm not sure I'm learning anything. And this is when my learning started. And I decided I needed to, I'd hear all these words like spiritual and spirit, and I thought, that's nice. But I really didn't understand to get into the depth of what my spiritual self was. I never really studied me. I studied everything outside, from the Bible and so on, but not me and my spiritual self. And so I started on a journey. What I didn't like about the traditional church was that they were, so many of them at that time anyway, I don't know what they do these days, but they were always talking about being born in sin. I thought, and I felt guilty. I felt guilty all the time. How do you get out of being sinful? Well, of course, Jesus died for our sins. Then that must mean we're no longer sinning. But they didn't approach it that way. They keep saying Jesus died for our sins, but we are born in sin. So, another thing to learn, I guess. People join churches for different reasons. Sometimes they join churches because of the family always went there. That's where my family went, that's where I grew up, and that's where I belong. Or they may have attended because they like the minister and they like the friendly people. And there are those who attend as an insurance policy to get to heaven. And there are some people that don't have a particular interest in God. And they feel, well, I'm nice enough already. I don't have to go to church. I don't think that belongs to any of us here. In my 40s, my husband and I found a spiritual group. This group was people in town that wanted to study the metaphysical approach to the Bible and to understanding. And so we met at our homes, different homes, and it was called New Thought then, but I've learned since that it was an old thought that came from way past. But what I learned here, I'm going to tell you how I learned some of the things I learned about my spiritual self. What I learned here, one thing that was really kind of amusing, I guess, and no, it wasn't amusing. We'd sit in circles, and we'd go around, and each person would say a prayer. Well, I was sweating. I didn't know how to say a prayer, and I was scared to say a prayer. And I thought, I have to say something wonderful. I must say things that flourish and make people rise above themselves, And I couldn't think of a word to say. And so I would pass most of the time. I just couldn't do it. And this is when I learned that when you can't find words for a prayer, God will listen to your heart. Prayers don't have to be put into words. As we sang this morning, our prayers are thoughts. Then we would have sit in a circle, and we would put forth energy, the energy of each of us, to one goal, one common goal. And if you don't believe this, you can ask my daughter, and she will verify it. I think I'm telling you this right. I would sit in a chair I sat in the chair in the middle, and she was 10, and another adult, one on each side of the chair, and everybody sent forth energy, and they lifted me right up in the air with one hand each. And I'm no lightweight, you know. And so that was amazing to me, and I learned that energy is what's going to do it. And think about our church where we are now. We have to have that common energy that's going to keep us alive here. We have to have our goal together, not fighting what's happening, not saying, oh, this isn't right and that's not right and so on. We have a common goal of keeping our church alive and finding the minister that will help us do that. You ready for that? Yes. Good. So that was one thing I learned. After my divorce, I stopped going to church. And I decided that I would go to retreats and that I would go to different classes and so on. And a book came out called Life After Life. And this was a first probably bestseller on the list in the 70s pertaining to life after death. People didn't talk about it when I was young. We don't talk about reincarnation and things of that nature. You know, that's not right. We were stuck in a rut of what is there. Well, I went to a retreat where the man who wrote Life After Life was, and he was giving a class. And I just thought he was wonderful. We'd sit in the classroom, and he would have his shorts on and his flippers and so on, and he'd sit on the radiator with cross-legged and teach the class. And I learned a great deal from him about reincarnation. And I believed it. I truly did. But let me tell you, I couldn't believe what was happening to me because everything was so kind of different. But I wanted to learn. I had a friend whose husband was a psychologist. And they were nice, wonderful people. But when I talk about what I was learning, he would say, oh, that's just a bunch of crap. You know? He said, I don't believe in anything. We die, we die. That's it. It's over, you know? And we'd have these little kind of arguments amongst us. And then I decided, well, why argue with him? His belief is his belief, right? But he got cancer. And it was in his jaw. And I went over to see them frequently. They didn't have a washing machine, so I took his clothes and washed them all the time. But, and they had money, and I didn't. But we were in his bedroom, and he was laying down. And I went into the bedroom to see him, and he asked his wife to leave the room. And she did, and he said, come here. Do you really, really believe there is life after death? Do you really believe that? And I said, with all my heart, Jack, with all my heart. And he just relaxed. And I learned at that time that it is important for us, we all need to believe. Somewhere inside of us, no matter what we say, somewhere deep in our soul, we know that we need to believe and have faith that there is life after death. When I was doing some classes, we tried to start an Institute of Man here, a little church that Marion, some of us were gathered together because we had a gal who came from New York. But it didn't last because there were too many people that were still in the old phase of traditional church. Sometimes I think there were people who looked upon us as like a cult or a sect or something like that. What was I going to say? Oh, shoot. Carla, who was our leader, was telling us about, she came from New York, and she said when she became aware of things, she had a friend who was also teaching what she was teaching, and she was on the streets of New York, and a young man came up to her with a gun, and he said, I want your money. And she said, why? I'm hungry and I want your money. And she said, well, you can kill me if you want to, but you can kill my body. You won't be able to kill me. He says, why not? I've got a gun. And she says, you can kill my body, but you can't kill my soul. He said, what? I've got a gun. And she said, I tell you what, I'll take you to lunch. Put the gun away and I'll take you to lunch and feed you, and I'll tell you all about it. From what I understand, he became a follower of hers. I thought that was very interesting. But the things I learned when I was not going to church, but going to retreats and dealing with people who believed as I believed, was ability to read auras as well. And readings from guidance, on the other side. And I could share these all day, but I don't think they're going to serve lunch, so I won't do that. But I've picked out a few I'd like to share with you. It's the next page here. I didn't realize that I was really learning about my spiritual self until I had some occasions that came up that made me wonder, why me? Why am I involved in this? For instance, I was coming home, flying home from California after judging a contest out there for Sweet Adelines. And do you mind if I have a drink of water? My lips are getting dry. It is water, isn't it? Okay. Can't find the opening. Okay. And the plane had to set down, and we had trouble with the plane. And he said, we're going to have to land because we can't keep going. And he said, but we'll have to land in a place that the airport is closed. It's been closed for quite a while. And there was nobody there. They landed the plane. I was in the back. And so I was one of the last ones out. And when I went into the airport, there were still chairs in there, but nobody except the passengers. And I looked over and I saw this lady over in the back, and she had this aura around her. And I went over and I noticed that she was reading an Edgar Cayce book. Do you know what Edgar Cayce, who he is, don't you? Yeah. And I said, sat down, I said, I see you're reading Edgar Cayce. And she said, yes, my son gave it to me. I went to see him in San Diego, and he doesn't know it, but that'll be the last time I'll see him. I said, why? And she said, because my husband died and I can't live without him. So I'm going to go home and take my own life. And I said, you are? Why? Because I can't live without him. And I said, yes, you can. He's still with you. And I don't know what all I said, but we talked for over an hour while we sat there and waited for another plane to come and pick us up. And her aura grew as I talked to her. And then we time to get back on a new plane, and she stood up and she hugged me very tight, and she said, you have saved my life. She said, the rocking chair that rocks in my living room is my husband? And I said, yes. He's there for you, And I never saw her again. She lived in Michigan. But to me, this was kind of overwhelming, I just directed toward her and then just shared her thoughts, and she told me I saved her life. It was beautiful. My stepfather had brain cancer, and we brought him home from the hospital and put a hospital bed in my mother's house. And he was in a coma practically. And so we would take turns sitting with him. We'd sit at the end of the bed looking, being with him while somebody else would be cooking or whatever. And I was with him one night, and my daughter and my mother were in the kitchen, and he was just out. And suddenly, he raised up. And as he raised up and sat up, there's a huge blue aura around him. Blue is the color of love. It was just huge. And he went, and died. I was overwhelmed by that as well. But I learned that love, you know, relaxes you, and that there was somebody from the other side. When I went to, I did a lot of traveling for Sweet Adelines and all around the world, I guess. And I was in Amsterdam judging a contest there for Sweet Adelines. And after the contest was over, there was this lady that had been working there as, you know, helping us out and all that. And she said, "Could I talk to you for a minute?" And I said, "Well, sure." I said, "Yeah." So we went off someplace together, and she said, "I just felt I needed to talk to you." She said, 2 months ago, I have 3 sons, and 2 months ago, my older son and my middle son were fighting upstairs, you know, just wrestling around, having fun wrestling, if you will. And my younger son came down and yelled at me, "Mom, Mom, something's wrong with Jack." Not Jack, Jim. He's upstairs, and he's sick. She ran up there, and he'd had a heart attack while they were wrestling, and she held him in her arms, and he was gasping for air, and she said, "It is all right to let go. It's all right to let go, son." And she said, "Now nobody in my family will talk to me. They all thought I was being cruel and mean to him, to tell him it was all right to let go." And she said, "I just didn't want him to go in fear and terror. I wanted him to be comfortable going." And I said, "You did the right thing." Now, see, I didn't say anything, but she needed somebody to talk to. And I was there for her. And why she picked me, I don't know, but there's something that was starting to draw these people to me, you know, and I couldn't figure it out. And it was another moment that was good. It was kind of like, I worked at a bank for a while, and there was this guy he was a computer analyst, so you know how they are, they're very quiet and detailed and so on. And you must know somebody like that. And so he rarely spoke to anybody, and the two of us had to travel in the car to a business that we were going to out of town. And as we were driving along, I have no idea what I said. All I remember is that he started crying while he was driving. And I couldn't figure it out. I said, "Charles, why are you crying?" He said, "I've never told anybody this before, but I have to get it off my chest." He said, "I died. I died, and I came back. And I'm scared to tell anybody." So we talked about it. Wow, there's so many things, so many out there for us. My mom had cancer. Well, one of the things I did learn from both the gal in Amsterdam and from the guy in the car was that to be spiritual, you need to listen. You need to be able to listen to people. Not just hand them advice and tell them how to think and how to pray and all that sort of thing and what you should do, but just listen. That's all they want. It's comfortable. They need that. When Mom had cancer, and she had bladder cancer, it was right after her husband, my stepfather, died, and they burned her in radiation so badly that she had a big hole in her stomach, and it was like leather. It wouldn't grow back together. So every day after work, I would stop by her house, and I would clean out the hole in her stomach and put a new bandage on. I did that for over a year, and I was with my mom, and it was something I could do for her, and it meant so much to her. So sometimes it takes action. Sometimes it takes doing things physically for people. Such as my cousin. She was mean. And I was the only person related to her, or probably maybe the only friend she had in town. And she would say cruel things. You know, she'd say, "I hated your mom." Well, thanks a lot. I'm glad to know that. And then, we'd go out to eat, and she'd tell them about the meal and how to fix coffee and how, that sort of thing. And, but I kept taking her out and doing things with her. And then she'd turn around and give me earrings or something. She was real nice for a while. Well, I started to recognize this as dementia. But I stayed with her. I was the only one who visited her, and the only one that seemed to care. Her brother was down in Tulsa. He cared, but he couldn't be here all the time. So that was another experience for me, touching people who have difficulties in their lives, and that we can be nice to nice people, but it's important to be nice to difficult people. They need that more than anything. My grandmother lived with me for 5 years after my mother died, and she had raised me. She and my grandfather had really raised me because I didn't move in with my mom again until I was 15. So she was like a mom to me. I called her Mommy all my life. Everybody called her Mommy, you know. And I hated it when I went shopping with her and I'd yell, "Hey, Mommy, look at this." And people, this big woman, you know, with this lady calling her Mommy. But she was a mommy. And she was, for 5 years, she lived there with my kids and me. And then she, when she was 94, I had to take her to the hospital. And she was really in bad shape. So we took her over to the American home on First Avenue. And she was almost comatose. Now, I had worked in a hospital to put myself through college. And so I saw a lot of dead people. A lot of people die, let's put it that way. And at that time, I had no spiritual learning, and I just felt terrible to be around dead people. But by the time my grandmother reached this stage, I wanted to be with her. I wanted to comfort her. And but my chorus was going to be competing in a couple of weeks, and we had a rehearsal that night. And so I thought, I've got to leave. What'll I do? I've got to be there, but I want to be with my grandmother, and that's really more important. And at that moment, my grandmother, who was really out of it, said, "Oh, Jan is here, Jan is here." And she raised up and just smiled, and that's her daughter's name, my mother. That was her daughter's name. Jan is here. And I thought, oh, how wonderful. I looked around, I was looking for my mother, you know. Where? And so I knew that she would be all right. And I went to chorus rehearsal. And after chorus rehearsal, I was going back, but she had died. And I was comforted to know she was with my mother. It was a beautiful experience. My son was killed when he was 37. I think most of you know that. Some of you know that. I don't know about the rest of you, but that's all right. He was my buddy. We were really chums. And he was hit by a hit-and-run drunk driver. And Thelma was going to do the service, and she'd only been with us a couple of months, so she really didn't know Jeff, you know. And she said, "Well, what should I say? What should I do? You know, I don't know him that well." And she went to the bookstore, and she was wandering around trying to find something to help her with her sermon, or her funeral sermon. And all of a sudden, from the top shelf, a book fell down. And she looked at it, and it said, "Jesus in Jeans." Every Christmas, I would give my son jeans for Christmas. He wore jeans all the time. It was a sad event, of course. It was the worst thing probably that ever happened in my life. But the next, after he died, he donated all of his organs, and he helped 100 people. I got a note from the guy who got his eyes and the one who got his heart. But I didn't know where, but he had skin tissue and everything. He always said to me, "Mom, if anything happens to me, just throw my body out in the trash can. I don't need it anymore." But he also hated to drive. He said that cars are dangerous, and that's what hit him and killed him, was a car. And he also said, "I probably won't live into the new century." And he died in 2000. So I think he had some ESP up here, if I'm not mistaken. But it was a bad time in many ways. People came to the house, of course, and one gal said to me, it's just amazing what people say, and she said, I know just how you feel. I lost my grandmother 2 months ago. And that time, knock came on the door, and I went to the door, and it was Elaine Fisher. And she had a pot of flowers for me, and she handed them to me. And I said, well, come on in, Elaine. She said, no, I just want you to know I'm really sorry that it had to happen. And she turned and walked away. I'll never forget that. It was probably one of the most beautiful things to be said to somebody who had lost a loved one. Simple. We don't have to go into all the people we've lost and all this misery and things we've been through. All of us here have lost somebody who's dear to us, right? We do not every time we see someone else have to tell them about it, although I'm telling you about this again today. But to let you know how my spiritual journey taught me so much. Even the dumb mistakes I made lots of dumb mistakes, you know? But I learned from those mistakes just about as much as I learned from my opportunities. Have you? And for instance, forgiveness. I was really amazed after my son died that the woman came up to me, the man's mother came up to me and wanted to talk to me. And I forgave him. I forgave the boy, the man that killed my son. I said, where'd this come from? It was just so easy. That sometimes we have to experience what we believe in order to believe it, actually be a proud believer, right? So, I could go on, of course. I want to tell you about this. My daughter Beth, who's in Texas now, she came up, of course, and the next day after he died, she said, let's go for a walk in Indian Creek, down there in the trail. Let's just go for a walk. So I said, okay, and I walked with her for quite a while, and then I said, I've got to sit down. I don't want to walk anymore. You go ahead. So she did. She walked on. She's quite a walker. And I sat down on a bench right by the water, and I looked down, there was a dead butterfly right there. And oh, God, something else dead, And I looked at it a long time, and it was just dead. And then suddenly, it started crawling, and it flew up and flew away. What do you think that indicates? We're all going to fly off, and stay alive. Well, I've found not just religion, which is outside of myself, but my spiritual self, which is inside myself. And so what's inside of us is what leads us to the religion that will meet our needs. There's a lot of diversity in our needs. And we have found this, and I've been here 30 years, longer than any other church, and you didn't have to baptize me. My elementary yearbook said that I would be a singing nurse going from hospital to hospital singing to people. Well, the singing part I did, but I worked in the hospital and I didn't want to be a nurse anymore. But in a way, I guess maybe my life has led me towards helping people, which is what nurses do. And I grew up kind of wanting to be famous and a star. You know how that is. Well, I'm not famous and I'm not a star, even though it was offered to me. When I was 19, my cousin who lived in Chicago had a companion, lifetime companion, who owned Madison Square Garden, and he sponsored and was an agent for Sonia Heine and Joe Lewis and so on. So, he had money. And he offered to get me into show business. That was an offer. Should I take it? And I didn't. I stayed here, and I'm so glad I did. And in a way, I would probably never have learned the spiritual part of myself had I not. And I'm still learning. It was hard for me to say I love you as I grew up. because I thought that you had to like somebody before you could love them. It was a step up from liking. But one of the biggest things I've learned is that I can now say, I love you, even if I don't like what you do. I guess I learned that from my kids. Because I kept on loving them no matter what they did, right? So it really does help. I did a lot of things, excuse me, I'm having trouble getting my thoughts. I think of Nina as a younger me. Younger. I used to be in music all my life, you know that, and plays and so on. I just don't play the piano like she does. You know, I'm good at chopsticks. But anyway, and I don't sing like she does, but I think I can act. I'm a speech and drama major, and I do some acting. And I spent my whole life performing, and that's what I always wanted to do. I'm not out there on TV and so on. I've performed, I've had 2 radio shows and TV shows and plays I was in and all that sort of thing, and learned to be a communications director for businesses. So I want to thank you and everybody around me for your support, because I hope I haven't kept you too long. But it was important to me to share this, and you've allowed me to do that, and I love you for it. Shall we have a prayer meditation? Let us close our eyes. May the presence of God surround us, within us and around us, as it guides us to love, which enfolds us. May His power protect us, for then we have the courage and the desire to keep on learning for spiritual growth throughout our lives. The learning of unselfishness, of caring for others, using our knowledge wisely, listening, cherishing prayer and meditation, and forgiveness of ourselves and others. Help us to find the words and comfort for those who are going through a period of pain and suffering in their lives. Let us take a minute for you to reflect on something in your life that has helped your spiritual growth. Important factor in our life, and we need to be consistently aware of our relationship with him or her. Amen.